We are live.
Hello, YouTube. Bah. I've been reading a lot of books about sheep to my 1 year old. We've been singing Baa Baa Black Sheep over and over and over. It's one of his favorites. And I hope that it's not an indicator that he feels othered in the family. So today, that is what our episode is about, the black sheep's path, actually. The black sheep's path and ancestral healing for family cycle breakers. So, anyone tuning in that feels like they're the black sheep, please stay on the edge of your seat. We're going to be talking about a lot of things related to this. And Michael is going to kick us off today with a little bit of background history and etymology of the term black sheep. Michael, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Ruschelle. So I was very interested when this came up, and we know this is a search term that's heavily used, and I was intrigued as to where the phrase came from, and also I had a slight concern whether there's some kind of racial aspect to that term. And so looking back into it, I discovered that this is an ancient British and Irish farming term. It also exists in other countries. So it became very prevalent in the 18th century, but the first recorded documented use of it is actually by a guy called Thomas Shepherd in the first half of the 17th century. So very, very on point there. And it relates to the situation where if you have a flock of white sheep, and occasionally there will be the odd one that has a black wool due to a genetic mutation. And this was an undesirable characteristic for the simple reason that white wool can be dyed and black wool can't be dyed. So white wool can be turned into any color that you like. Black wool is like a Model T Ford. And therefore the price of the wool was lower. And so it was actually discriminating against the wool, the color of the wool, because there was less value in it. And so it's about attributes. It's about desirable and undesirable attributes in a group situation. And that has led to a thing called the black sheep effect, which has been studied academically. And I think we might talk about that more as we go through today. I'm just going to hand back to you at that point.
Bernadette, did anything stand out? I saw you reacted to some of the things that Michael was saying. So,
well, it's interesting. Yeah, it's just where the actual term came from, and thinking that the black sheep, that the black wool was less valuable, and and in some ways my reaction was, I think the black wool's more valuable. You know what I mean? That there's something in that purity of the color, that it's not a created color in that we're dyeing it. It's a color that came out. And so that's actually what was going through my head when Michael was sharing that, and I didn't know that story. So
yeah, Michael, I also picked up on the financial aspect of it. I just ran a group with a family yesterday, and we were talking about inherent worth and earned worth, and that in family enterprises, well, just, I lived in Manhattan. I think Manhattan leads with earned worth. The first question that everybody asks you is, what is your profession? What do you do? And then they rank you based on what you do in the world, versus inherent worth, which we maybe spend a little bit less time on in general, that you're lovable because you exist or because of your inherent value. And I love this concept of reframing how we see the black sheep as this inherently rare and valuable something. And I think that's the basis of our conversation today, is that if we have felt like we're the black sheep, there is this rarity and this value that we're going to be uncovering a little bit. So the first thing that I wanted to get into is this idea of the marking in family systems, and why families unconsciously will deem someone the black sheep of the family. So what we do know about family systems is that they assign roles unconsciously. And there's a reason for that. Families need stability in their interactions and their systems, and sometimes difference can be threatening. So in the literal example, for a sheep herder, they were the price, the value of their flock was threatened if they had multiple black sheep in it, right? So there needed to be homogeny of white sheep in order to bring something to the market. So inherently, our families are trying to stay safe when they deem someone the black sheep. But I would like to talk a little bit about these unconscious roles that our families give us, and possibly the impact of that on us as children. So, Michael or Bernadette, anything that you have to thoughts you have about the marking of being labeled the black sheep in the family?
Bernadette?
Well, in doing research and getting ready for our talk today, I knew this story about my Uncle Ed, Texas Ed. It was a great uncle, Texas Ed, and just that he was in Texas, and it was kind of understood that he was the black sheep. But as I looked into the story, and I don't want to go through the whole story now, but it goes back to his childhood and what happened in childhood. And, it is he got this, this labeling through no fault of his own, is really what it boils down to. Did you want me to go further, or is that enough for now?
Yeah. How did he get that in his childhood?
Well, what it turned out that when I looked back and started looking at his history, my great grandfather had 3 wives, and he had 3 wives because 2 of them passed away. And Uncle Ed was the product of his first wife, and so when his mother died when he was only 2 years old, or 2.5 years old, and he had a brother. There was another child of that union. But I think the trauma of that, automatically the grandmother stepped in and took Uncle Ed to care for him. There's all of this is what's tumbling out as I'm looking into this now. And there's a letter that he sends years later when he really is the black sheep, where he lists himself as the wild child. And so the wild child ended up becoming the black sheep and being ostracized and really removed from the family. And he ended up, this family grew up is a New York family, and Texas Ed moved to Texas by himself. So that's how far he went.
Okay, Bernadette. So he was, in a sense, motherless and untethered as a child, and kind of internalized the role of being different from everyone else.
Yes.
Yeah. So if a parent has died, or a parent, we have a parent because of our mother went out of wedlock and was with another man. So the actual genetics of being the other is, that's one way that we're marked as different from our family. Or if we find out through ancestry that,
yes,
that we're different, we're from a different father than the rest of the family. One example that I was thinking of was if there is childhood sexual abuse inside the family. A lot of times the one who rebels against, so let's say the family is keeping the childhood sexual abuse a secret, and if someone rebels outside of the family system, they are then the black sheep because they have broken the secret within the family. So childhood abuse, labeling it and calling it out. So the child that knows better and speaks up is another one. I had another. Michael, did you have an example? I was thinking of another and I forgot.
Yeah, I have a number of examples on both sides of my family, but the one that say I very much identified with the black sheep. When I was growing up, I was felt other, and even though my parents were present, I actually felt abandoned, and I didn't know at the time that was because of all of their unprocessed abandonment. So there was this feeling of other, and then when I started getting into the genealogy work, and I learned about my grandmother who'd been kicked out of the family for having an affair, and so she was the black sheep who was never spoken of, and I'd been wrestling with porn addiction at that time, so I kind of connected those two and thought, I'm carrying that same woundedness that she had. And so I came to kind of identify that as being thing. And then what I notice is that what happens is we actually start to quarantine ourselves. So it's not, the marking doesn't have to come from the family onto the black sheep. We can perceive ourselves as being black sheep, and we can kind of unconsciously mark ourselves, and then we just kind of distance ourselves from the family.
Okay, so the one other, lack of parental emotional connection, whether that's parental mental illness, substance abuse, personality disorders. I think I said last week, right? My great-grandmother told my grandmother she didn't like her, didn't want her around, didn't like her because she looked like her father. So this is a very borderline personality thing to say, right? A mental health issue happening with the mom. And Michael, what you just said comes to kind of our next point, which is once either the family system has perceived you as a black sheep, or you have perceived yourself as an other, someone different from the family system, then there's the burden of that. And I think that's really what we want to talk about when we think about that. If we've labeled ourselves other from the family, the emotional weight of being the black sheep, and what it is that we're carrying. Would either of you like to kind of speak to that, the emotional weight of being the black sheep?
Yeah, definitely a sense of not belonging and of being. I remember very conscious as a child of thinking that I was the problem. And, my parents were obviously trying to do their best. I could see that. And yet I felt that I was, ungrateful for that. And there's the burden of shame of that. So even when you're not actively being marked out by the family, this is what happens. But this is where the black sheep effect comes in, which is how families behave towards what they call in-group members who have desirable attributes and in-group members who have undesirable attributes, which is the black sheep. And even if it's self-imposed, you find that the family is just kind of drifting away from you. So the way that the programming of the black sheep program is quite insidious, and that even if you don't want to be the black sheep and don't want to carry that burden, you still find yourself feeling that you need to separate yourself and carry that burden on your own.
And it sounds like, Michael, a lot of this happens unconsciously.
Absolutely, yes. It was only later on when I started piecing together the genealogy and the trauma pieces that I started to see the connections and the links. Early on, it was all just thing. And I ended up spending a lot of time traveling, living and working in different countries, and it's very easy to see with hindsight that there was a running away going on.
There isn't. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bernadette. Yeah, go ahead.
what brought up, what this is bringing up for me is what you both said, is that sometimes we make ourselves the black sheep unconsciously, because we are one of these things doesn't belong here. You know, if we feel different from the family, we may, for whatever reason, and sometimes it's just we are just born with different inclinations. And I just think that's really important for people listening, is that sometimes when you feel that you, and then when you feel you are the black sheep, it has evolved from your feeling distant from the rest of the family for other reasons, and then suddenly that becomes, they're not like us, and they get separated out. So I just think it's a really important thing to hold on to as we're talking about this, is for people.
I think it would be quite possible that if you went round the family, you might find a whole bunch of people identifying as the black sheep.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was. Yeah, go ahead, Bernadette. Mm-hmm.
Well, but then there's always one that seems to stand out. Even it's like the color's a little darker or whatever, you know, and so I think that's what happens. But I agree with you, Michael, that we all kind of sometimes feel like I don't belong in this group.
Yeah, and maybe now, especially, there are so many systems that are trying to either directly or indirectly impact family cohesion, that every family member can at some point just feel like they're in a silo and doing things by themselves. So whether or not, I met with a family yesterday, and it's interesting just when you get, these are cousins, so it's interesting when you get people together, how they have no idea what the other people are thinking until you actually sit them down to have a conversation together. And they get to be together again and say, I really do miss you. I really wish there was more conversation. And when we're off by ourselves, we lose touch of, we make up stories about what our family says, thinks of us. We think they don't like us. We think we can think all kinds of things. And it's different when you get in a room together. So we've gone through the marking, and let's see. We've looked at the marking, and we've looked at, what was the other one? The burden of being the black sheep. And Michael brought up another point, which is the exile. Sometimes when we become the black sheep, we say, I've had enough. I'm out of here. I'm either going to physically separate or isolate. There's one other part to that, which is identity fragmentation. So identity confusion. Examples of clients or your own experiences or people within your family where this exile happened. And
definitely my father's father, you can see the fragmentation happening if you look over the data points. And so he married, and my father was born, and then when my father was 4, his wife died from tuberculosis in 1926. And then he remarried in 1930. And then at some point in 1935, there was some kind of schism with his own father, my great-grandfather, and he was disinherited. And the only thing we've found in the data record is that 2 weeks before the new will that disinherited him, he incurred a speeding ticket and occurred in the newspaper. And say it's ridiculous to think that might be the cause of being disinherited. But the social standing and the sensitivity to insult back then was very, very different from today. So it's hard to know. And then the second marriage proved to be difficult. And during the war, he just walked out and disappeared, abandoning my father with his step family. So you can see there's a gradual breaking down of his place in the family until he eventually just disappeared into South London somewhere, where he had a relationship with another woman who claimed to be his wife and who wasn't, because he was still legally in the second marriage. So you can just see the fragmentation, and then finally the whole thing is just too much.
Well, if there was a speeding ticket, Michael, maybe there were other behaviors in this man's life that were out of control. A speeding ticket could just be a glimpse, or it could be nothing, right? Sometimes it's
absolutely, yes. We don't. Yeah, and nobody documents these things.
Right. But we can formulate, well, Michael, let's go with, what is your gut impression of finding out that this man had a speeding ticket and then was ostracized? What's the story that Michael's making up about this? My
sense is that there is the timing to me is the 2 weeks, literally. I find it difficult to move past the precision of the timing without attaching a story to it.
Okay. So Michael's story is more than likely there is a connection there. And I want to take that a little bit deeper, Michael. What does that story mean for your life?
All of this obviously impacted my father very greatly. So when my grandfather was, obviously he lost his mother when he was 4. And as I've already recounted on here, that was my first experience of recovering trauma, was when I processed the pain from that death. And then when the disinheritance happened, he got disinherited too, because there was no provision made for him independently of his father. So, and again, this is we end up with not just a black sheep, but a black flock. Because it's like this whole branch is toxic. So that's another aspect of this thing, is that like the whole piece gets chopped off. And then finally, when he walked out during the war, that I came to see had a very great impact on my father, he was 19 at the time and involved in extremely hazardous wartime work. And so I think there was a great impact on him, overwhelm of all of that situation. So it was lots of fragments adding up to a very heavy impact on my father, which then became an impact on me.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think that's an example of these details. Michael, you posted on Substack today that the healing is in the details. And this is an example of where trauma-informed genealogy can take us back to a detail and possibly unravel a whole story for us.
And so where I've arrived at is it actually doesn't matter whether the speeding ticket was the cause of the disinheritance or not, but it was a portal for me to accept what had happened and arrive at a narrative that I could understand, rather than have this narrative that I didn't understand. So it may or may not be accurate, but it's allowed the whole thing to sit with me.
Michael, I love that you just explained that, because that is often when we look back, it isn't about finding the exact thing that happened or the exact cause of the thing that happened. It is understanding that in that there is this huge emotional breakdown, that trauma is there, and that can be just enough to know that this has been passed down, or this is, I'm dealing with some of this. So that's an important point to make about we don't have to have the exact story in order to find.
Many times that the exact truth is simply not available.
Yeah.
But if you can get something that's near enough in some way, it can often unlock the feelings around it.
I was going to say, I would love to go back to did you have another question for Michael? Because there's something I wanted to go back to.
No, go ahead.
you were talking earlier, or mentioned earlier, about people who are the black sheep in the family, who are the ones that um, have been abused, sexually abused, any type of abuse, and that they are, um, because they don't want to be accepting of that abuse, and they're trying to, they want it to be acknowledged that this has happened, that they become the black sheep, because we don't want that story to be told, and we don't want anybody else. And I have a client that I've worked with for a while who had some some sexual abuse that was over and over and over, and that her family, and with her father, that it was her father that was abusing her, and the family continues to want to hold on to the narrative that this is something we don't talk about, and that she's pushed out with her emotions as the black sheep, almost to the point of, and I want to say this very gently, that she caused it, you know what I mean, where they want to put that blame on her because it's easier for the family to not have to acknowledge, and the father is still in the family unit and she's separate, and she rarely gets together with the family because of this. And it also, even in her own family, there is, in her own, married with her own children, um, there is this not wanting to, they don't know what to do with her pain. And so there's a part of them too that want to, not to make her a, a black sheep, but they want somebody else to acknowledge this for her so that she can heal a little bit. So it's just being that, just what you having, being the person that shouldn't be the black sheep, that is made the black sheep, is just an important thing to acknowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have clients who have been in that experience, and I have family members who, my own family actually made a victim of sexual abuse the black sheep. And that kind of goes with this overlap of the overlap between the black sheep and the scapegoat. So black sheeps don't always have to be a scapegoat for things, for family shame, but sometimes they are. And that's that way for the family system to stay united and be in denial around certain things and stay cohesive. We're just going to put it off on that one person because they're the one causing the problem. They're the troublemaker. And that's an example of what abuse actually, especially sexual abuse, actually is. So abuse is the transfer of shame from the perpetrator onto the victim. And then the victim has to carry the shame and deal with it. If you are someone who's identified as a black sheep and a scapegoat for your family's shame, then you may, if you're listening, you may already be in some form of exile, whether it's actually exiled from your family physically or whether just emotionally you've separated from your family. And while you are in exile can sometimes feel confusing and limbo, and as if we're trying to figure ourselves out. And today, we really want to express that on the other side of that exile, there is a place for clarity and for awakening and for knowing who you are and being accepted again. Maybe not in that herd, but maybe in a herd that you have created of your own. Do either of you have stories of people? Go ahead, Michael.
I just want to say this is a classic example of what they call the black sheep effect, where the in-group ostracizes somebody for whatever reason, and you say it's for the carrying of the shame group, the shame of the group. And I just wanted to make a comment that here at Ancestral Healing Center, that healing shame is one of our 4 core pillars of our work, and we have found that it is one of the critical gateways to healing. So if you're listening today, and this is one of the situations that you're in, we know we bandy the word shame around, but I just want to stop for a moment and say processing shame is critical, and say it is something that we focus on. So if this is an area that's where you're struggling, please get in touch. Please come and visit our website. Please come and talk to us, because it is an area that we believe is crucial towards coming out of that exile.
Yeah, and especially if it is something related to your family system and your family history that you feel like has been put on you. Yeah, that shame, you don't deserve to carry that.
And that too is why trauma-informed genealogy is so powerful, because pulling out the stories of what the family has been through back generations may not change the circumstances of what happened in this lifetime to somebody. But when we examine back further and see the causes of these behaviors, or it helps us in processing the shame that we may feel in this now. So there is a connection to knowing more about the family system back in the last generations that can help you understand what you are feeling now.
And often the abuse, again, right, it didn't start with just your parents. That level of abuse, especially sexual abuse, is often generations of that experience. So yeah, for someone who's really deep in the kind of the exile and the isolation of the experience, I do want to make a little bit of time to talk about the healing and the other side of that. So once someone has done work around shame and processed the grief of being separate from their family, either of you have examples with your clients of clients who've come out on the other side of that, and what happens to them when they process their shame, their grief, and take a look at themselves again?
Bernadette, have you got something there?
So, not necessarily in the case of somebody who has done this through as a black sheep of the family, but someone who's carrying shame, yes. So and finding out, I had a client whose grandfather shot her grandmother, and this brought shame to the family, because there was this, and we discovered together through a newspaper article that I was able to find that described that they had written about this event, and they described why the grandfather had shot the grandmother, and he was very sick and was told he was going to be separated from the family and taken to some type of an asylum that was away from his family. So this was and it sounds very odd, but when she understood that, it gave her at least a crumb of why this happened, and released her from carrying the shame that my grandfather shot my grandmother. So because we hold on to that, even those stories of something's wrong with our family, and so bad that my grandfather almost killed my grandmother. She did live. So that is it's not quite in the avenue of what we're talking about today as far as black sheep, but it is something that helped her release, an example of releasing shame, knowing the story.
Well, Bernadette, I think when we have that level of an incident in our family and the community knows about it, then we do become black sheep. Actually, as you were talking, I was remembering my own experience of finding out that there was the sexual abuse that was in my family was a very public outing. It was in the newspaper. It was a big deal, and we left town. We
Wow.
moved. And I remember I was 15 or 16, and I was popular and had lots of friends, and I suddenly couldn't relate. I was like, I am not like anybody here. We got to get out of here. I don't want to be around these. I am no longer in. So, there can be a community, like if it's a very public incident, we can suddenly feel not with our community anymore.
Yeah,
So,
I had an instance of that in my family, and that my great grandfather went on trial for tax fraud
right.
in 1922, and within a couple of years, both of his sons emigrated to New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
So they this again they were running a 7 pubs in South London, so very, very public. The whole of South London would have known about it. And I've no idea what happened to my great grandfather, but I know that 2 of his sons, say, went to New Zealand, and you can see the black sheep effect there. They would have felt like black sheep in London after having been very well known as the family of the publicans, who would have been very much in the spotlight. And they, again, just saying, I can't stay here, I have to go.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up one thing that just came to me when we're talking, because we're talking to, we're bringing these examples of in our family and in the history. But today, in this world of social media, if there anything that is would cause any incident that could be shameful, is you can't release it. Like you were just, what made me think of it, Michael, is you're talking about his sons moved to New Zealand, and they could start over in New Zealand, and here now it follows you, or at least there is a part of it that a lot of people are dealing with, this feeling that I'm never going to be able to release this. This is going to follow me forever because of what the social media aspect of what we're dealing with today. Just bringing it to somebody who might be feeling that themselves as they're listening to our conversation.
And this is where the family narrative can be completely untruthful. In the looking back at the genealogy record, you go, oh, well, they decided to emigrate for economic reasons and all of that, and then years later you discover there was this scandal, and suddenly you see the whole of the family's history in a different light.
Yeah. I think family history and family narrative is really interesting in the era of social media, and how things can. I was actually thinking of the Duggars. I didn't watch the Duggars extensively. Michael, are you familiar with the Duggars? It was a television show in the early 2000s in the US, and it was Bernadette, help me out here, hyper religious family with multiple children.
Multiple in the 16, 17, 18, 19
Yeah.
children maybe?
Was it 19 and counting or something like that? Like there were a bunch.
Yeah.
So, and they were hyper religious, and their lives were televised. And so that's one thing. And then of course the time goes on, and the family has had multiple scandals and sexual abuse within the family, and just a cascade of horrible things that this family has gone through collectively. And Bernadette's right, you can't get rid of it. You can't. And what is true? Okay, so that's the other thing. I have a very important story about that. My friend's daughter got her car, was learning to drive, and she came home and she told her mother, I almost backed into the parking spot at school. I want to learn how to back into the parking spot. I almost did, but I didn't. And her mother is like, this is insane. Just back into the parking spot. What are you talking about? And she said, well, I'm afraid someone will film me. So I'll have to come home and practice because I can't do it at school. And I thought to myself, nothing is like everything is to be shamed or ashamed of, or it's a society of where can we ridicule you or mock you to the point where you can't even back into a parking spot.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree, Bernadette. It feels like there's nowhere to run with shame with social media. And my only answer to that was, how do we learn to be shameless in the best possible way?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things I notice on social media, you see some of these clips come up and there'll be somebody struggling with some problem, and instead of helping, people will film.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I know we've gone off track, but it's not a,
but it is
not a cafe chat unless we go off track,
Well, but it's a record, and we're looking at historical records, and today's record can be modified or inaccurate to such a degree, or to used against you, or all these level of things. So Bernadette, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say that's why it's so important for us to keep talking about shame, about things that there's so much going on that people carry with them, and when we can teach them about how some of these things happened within our family, that would have been on social media now, and that there is how things happen, and the causes, and what has been passed down to us is so important to understand even in the behavior of people today. So when we see somebody who has done something on social media that we would really say that is not good, if we look back, this is where we go. What was their parents? What did their parents go through? What did their grandparents go through? What have they been brought through? And so we don't want to lose. We talk about it because it can be so healing, and we don't want to lose sight of what is happening also right now. So that's kind of.
Yeah. So Bernadette, you made a good point. When we know our family lineage, when we look at people from that perspective, that they're not just an individual, that they are in context,
Correct.
Then we can have a lot more compassion for them and where they are. So that's one, is that this work, the work of spending time with your ancestors in whatever way you choose, whether it's writing about them or genealogy or talking about them, is that it fuels compassion for other people. And the other thing is that it helps us know who we are, so that we don't get knocked off by balance when the world tells us we should be ashamed of ourselves.
Yeah, it helps build stability. And if you go out into the world today, almost every time I leave my house, I encounter somebody who is in an unstable condition, whether it's a driver or somebody at a train station who's shouting about something, or just where, I don't know if you're seeing that in America, but over here, virtually every time I go out, there's somebody out there who's not in a stable condition. And the more we can process what's happened in our family, the more we carry a stability into and through those situations.
Yeah,
I would agree. It gives us the opportunity to understand more deeply who we are, and to truly understand that all the way through. I say all the way through our bodies, that, okay, I really understand who I am, and I understand why I have these reactions, or when you know who you are, you look at the world differently. You're able to say, oh, you make choices differently. You know who just you're solid. I don't
It's
even know.
about being rooted.
Yes, rooted. Thank you. That's the word. You're rooted. You're rooted.
Yeah. And when we get rooted, so this kind of brings us to the end of the journey for a black sheep. If we were kind of going down the back road there, the black sheep in our story is landing at being a cycle breaker.
Mhm.
And sometimes black sheep want to be cycle breakers. Sometimes black sheep are like, I didn't sign up for this, and why am I having to do this anyway? But I just wanted to bring that up because, I think a lot of people come into therapy because they're the one person in their family who wanted to be a little bit insightful and look internal, and the rest of their family decided not to do that. So I think people who just come into therapy are like that category of brave people who want to break a cycle. And so cycle breakers are three things. They are people who consciously interrupt inherited patterns in their family. So they see something, they say, I'm not doing it this way anymore. They want to reclaim their identity and decide who they are for themselves. And they want to create a new future where they interact with people in a different way. And so if you have felt like you're the black sheep in your family today, that being a cycle breaker is what's on the other side of being a black sheep is having closer relationships, knowing who you are, and breaking those inherited patterns. And that's what we want to help you do here at the Ancestral
Yes,
Healing.
I would think there would be a very high correlation between people who see themselves as black sheep and the cycle breakers. And I have a very good friend. He was born here in Britain in the 1950s, and his father was Indian and his mother was German. And 1950s Britain was just come out of World War II against the Germans, and was very much an overwhelmingly white society at that time. And so he was, at school, he was absolutely the othered one, and he's just such a powerful cycle breaker, and all of those attributes that you described, he just absolutely fits those. And say that is it is our burden, but it's also our joy to be the cycle breaker.
Yeah, well, I am not going to be singing Baba Black Sheep with the same lens anymore. It's definitely lots to think about there. So, any last thoughts or comments toward people who may be feeling like they're the black sheep?
I would like to just continue with, what Michael said. When first of all, that Ancestral Healing Center is the reason that we're doing this is to help you understand more about who you are, and that when you begin that healing, that you realize I am a cycle breaker. I am doing this, and you're able to share it with others. There's just something about it that it brings you strength and rootedness that you didn't expect, that you never thought you'd ever have. So that's
what I'd like to close with is that in my case, what I've seen is I started out as being the black sheep of the family, and if you look at it from a family constellation perspective, being the one whose orbit was out there somewhere. And as a result of all of this work, I'm now the center of the family, because I'm the one who actually holds the truthful narrative of the story, and I'm the one who's balanced the energies and carries the emotional truths of the family, and I'm the one stabilizing the family constellation after having been the one that was completely opposite. And that is the fulfillment of the black sheep. And we talked initially, Bernadette talked about the black sheep being the mark of distinction. And that is the distinction. And I say that to anybody here. That is a potential for you, that you can be the one who is actually the one who's setting the standard of emotional intelligence in your constellation, whatever that looks like. And that's a very, very powerful thing to do.
Absolutely, Michael. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that, you are right. That is what I've seen echoed in my clients over and over again. They heal, and then all this comes together. So thank you so much for pointing that out, both you and Bernadette. Okay, until next time, have a great week, and we'll see you next week.